Hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you. My name is Kiran Bhat. I am an Indian American polyglot traveler and author, and I'm partnering with Kiran Bhat at the Chakkar, to do this reading series called the Chakkar, in which we will talk about kind of the different ways that Indian literature is shaping or advancing in the era of globalization. I'm really excited because we're having two very interesting same-sex authors talking with us. And they're also very interesting novelists and writers in their own right. We have Ruth Vanita, who is very well known actually in a lot of circles. And then we also have Aditya Tiwari, who is now starting his career. So we're also excited to hear from two very different perspectives who are probably similar in some ways, but also very different. So before we begin, Ruth or Aditya, Aditya, would you like to maybe introduce yourself or say some things about yourself?
Yes, thank you for introducing me, Kiran. And well, I am 23 years old and I am currently living in Jabalpur, Madhya Pradesh. And I started writing, let's say, I've been writing since 2014, but I like officially started writing in 2017. And I published my first book in 2019, which I almost like semi self-published. And yeah, now I'm writing my second book of poems, which I'm hoping it will be out by next year. So yeah.
Well, we hope so as well, because we're excited to see more of your poetry and kind of see also, from early 20s to mid 20s, how your career will go. Ruth, do you want to say anything about yourself?
Well, I don't know. I guess I could say that I started by writing poetry. I wrote poetry as a child, and I thought that was what I would do. And one of my early books was this book of poetry published by Penguin.
Oh, wonderful! And I think Ruth, I forgot her last name. The very famous German Indian poet Did she write the foreword? Or? No, I just.
Yeah. Who wrote the.
Yeah. That's her name. Yeah. Very cool. So so you started in poetry and then.
Yeah, then I moved on to sort of writing about both academic and general books about gender, sexuality, and in literature, in history, in philosophy. And now I've just written this novel, Memory of Light, also from Penguin, and I have another book of poems coming out at the end of the year from Coppercoin. It's called A Hidden Player.
Oh, wonderful. Coppercoin's a wonderful publisher too. So what made you go from like writing poetry to academic work and then now shifting again?
Well, I am an academic. I've been teaching most of my life. I started teaching at the age of 20. And so I was doing scholarly work, but my work is kind of crossover. I try to make it at least crossover, so it's not just meant for scholars, it's meant for general readers too. Say my book, like Love's Right, Same-Sex Marriage in India, it's not an academic book, it's published by Penguin. And so it's meant for readers in general. Even though I might bring scholarship into it, I write in a style that I hope anyone can read. And I never gave up. I wrote poetry throughout. I kept publishing poetry in magazines, on websites, and so on. Fiction is a new thing, and this was the first novel. Okay.
That's interesting. You're both actually poets as well. Aditya, how did you decide that you want to be a poet? How did you decide you want to start doing poetry?
So actually, poetry is something that like naturally happened to me in 2017. And I remember I wasn't exposed to a lot of Indian literature and let's say South Asian queer literature. And so yeah, I was just probably looking for a way to articulate my emotions, and I was just looking for a way to make myself seen and heard. And I think poetry did that for me very early. And then over the years, my writing has evolved on its own, and it's gotten its own soul and body with poetry. But then I also started freelancing as a journalist, and I started writing more and more about the conversations and issues that surround the queer community in smaller towns outside, let's say, places like Bombay or Delhi. And and yeah, that is how I got into writing and poetry. Yeah, I just I also just kept writing, and I just kept publishing my work here and there online, and yeah.
Yes, that's very good. I mean, I do you feel like you had to also write for the sake of like let me take care of that 1 second. So anyways, what was I saying? So do you feel like there was a certain emotional reason for you to turn to poetry? Do you feel like there were certain things that poetry allowed you to express about your life or your situation that other forms of art or other venues would not allow you to?
Yeah, I think, see, I'm not someone who knows how to draw. So I mean, I cannot draw. I think if I would have known how to draw, I think um I would have like drawn amazing artworks and stuff, But I think at that point, I mean, in 2017, I think poetry became a medium for me to express my sadness in some way or the other. And since I experienced a lot of homophobia in school, and I came out when I was 13, so I came out very early in life, and I've been very active in the scene and stuff. So I think I carry like a lot of baggage on my shoulders also. So yeah, I think with poetry I could just express everything that I was carrying inside of me. So yeah.
That's interesting. I think a lot, I mean, I can't speak for Ruth, but I also turned to poetry at 17. Not that any of it was good, but I also had to deal with certain emotional issues, which resulted in turning to a literary form like that. Ruth, do you feel like you also had to use poetry as a means to kind of channel certain things that society would not hear about you, or like try to channel certain voices of yourself that might not otherwise be heard? Or was there another reason for it?
No, I grew up with poetry. I grew up with my mother knew a lot of English poetry by heart, and she would go around the house doing her housework, reciting it, Keats, Shelley, Shakespeare, etc., Wordsworth. And I just picked it up. I learned a lot of it by heart too. I know a lot of it by heart. I just picked it up by osmosis. Then in school, of course, we studied Hindi poetry, and later I read Urdu poetry. So I sort of live in poetry, with the poetry of others. I started writing it because I love words. I sort of live in the world of playing with words, and it's poetry is the earliest form of literature. It's what sound poetry is the earliest form of literature, and so it's about that. It's not just about any particular type of emotion for me. It's about everything. It's about a reaction, a response to the world that is through words. It's a human way of responding to the world, right? So I guess that's, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought as well. It's a human way of responding to the world. You said words or world?
Words are the way of responding to the world. Isn't it? Who was it who said, "This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me"? I think it's Emily Dickinson. No? That poetry is your letter to the world that never wrote to me.
And why do you think that poetry does that better than a longer form, like a novel, a story, something else?
No, there are various ways of doing it. As Aditya was saying, painting is another way, but depends on what calls to you. And poetry, as I said, is the earliest form of literature. People sing in rhythm, right? Rhythm comes naturally to humans, and that's what works the most for me, I guess. Yeah.
Very good. It's so. Then why did you decide to now write a novel? Was there something else calling you?
Well, I had a love. Everybody has a story to tell, and I had a love story to tell, and it could have been said. And then the period that was alive in my mind was 18th century Lucknow and Delhi, North India, because I had written an earlier academic book on Urdu poetry in that period. So the two sort of came together in my imagination. The love story between the two women, and there are other stories there as well. And in that world, which is a very similar and yet totally different world from ours. And I knew the poetry of that period very well, and I'd read a lot of stories about that people of the time wrote, and so the two just clicked in my imagination, and that's yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting, like such a difference in form. It doesn't always come to us easily. Aditya, do you feel like you're steadfastly a poet, or would you someday try to experiment in other forms?
I think I mean, I still have a lot of things to explore with my writing. I think I think I'm just starting, and I think initially I used to think that, oh, I'm really good at this, and but over the years I've realized that, okay, I have a lot to learn, and since I'm not professionally trained as a poet, there are things that I don't know. I mean, for me, most of the times it's just words on paper. But then I've recently realized that, it's also, I mean, poetry is not always about emotions. Like how there's a friend of mine, he's a poet, and he's been very supportive with my writing. He's a Delhi-based queer poet himself. His name is Akhil Katiyal, and I recently spoke to him because there was a poem. I was editing this one poem. Initially, I wouldn't edit my work, but recently I started editing my work, and I started spending more and more time with my work. So I was just trying to edit this poem, refine this poem, and I was just not able to understand where the direction of the poem. So he told me that I have to put a location in it, and then he gave me some suggestions which were very useful to me, which I don't know if I would have been able to think like that. So I think there's so many things that I need to explore, and I think, I mean, I've become more patient with my writing and with everything, because initially I would just think about publishing my work, putting my work out there, but now I've realized that I'm physically just 23. So I have a lot of time, to write and to just, so I think at this point I just need to like enjoy my writing. Yeah. So I started enjoying, and
No. Yes, continue. Sorry.
yeah, so I've just started spending more time, and I've just started enjoying the process. So yeah.
That's a very important thing to learn. I think that I also, when I was younger, and I'll ask Ruth in a second about this too, but I mean, I think we all had that pressure, like, we have to get everything out there. We have to be perfect. We have to be perfect. We have to get all these things published in all these big places. And then you realize it just doesn't work that way. Ruth, if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you first published your book of poems?
Somewhere in my 30s.
As well. So did you also feel that kind of pressure? And did you feel like that changed with age? Or?
In my 30s, that's not that young. And pressure to publish poetry? No, I am not really. I didn't publish much poetry before that. Though I was writing ever since I was very young. Somebody asked me, there's this woman called Pradita Sharma who's a poet, writes in English, and she asked me, well, when you were in Delhi writing poetry at that time, did you have a group of other gay poets that you were writing with? I never thought about that, and I just realized that no, I then wrote a poem in response to that. I absolutely didn't. I didn't even know I didn't know any other gay Indian poet, and so I was writing not in complete isolation. I was showing it to friends or lovers, whatever. But I didn't have another. There was one very close friend who was writing poetry at the same time as I was, and we exchanged our poems. We wrote to each other and exchanged our, and that made a huge. It really sparked up a lot of writing of poetry because of. So yes, dialogue does matter, and having a group of poets who writing just a group of poets is very important. I think I didn't have that at the time, and the importance of it I realized when I started writing with this one woman, and even now I would say I don't. Smriti Namjoshi is another poet who I have a conversation with, not a poetic conversation, but a conversation with otherwise. So, but I only came to know about these other writers later, like Aga Shahid Ali or Smriti Namjoshi or Vikram Seth. I didn't know them at the time or know about them. So, yeah, that is, you were mentioning generational difference. That is one difference. I didn't have other gay writers that I knew at all. Indian writers, I knew Western writers. I didn't know them. But yeah, so that's.
Yes. No, I mean, that's actually almost the exact question I was about to come to, which was, it was coming to my mind, is like, what was it like then at that period when there aren't models, and when you are, and also the state of how homosexuality or these types of things are viewed in India, which is still not like, I don't want to make a generalization, of course, but it's not as easy as it is now in other countries, So what was it like for you at that time in that space, having to decide that, one, you wanted to have this identity and you want to be a writer in it, Like, what was that space like for you?
Well, wanting to be a writer had preceded knowing that I was gay. It preceded that, and it was just what I wanted to do even as a child.
Yeah.
But as far as finding models, that's what my research was about, I guess. It was finding out what Indian history is, what the history of same-sex sexuality is in India, which we had never been taught. And so I was doing the research in order to find those models, and I found those models, whether it's Urdu poets like Insha and Rangeen and so on, who I wouldn't slot in any, call them gay or bisexual. These are our terms. These were not their terms, but they were writing about same-sex love and cross-sex love in poetry. So they are among my models. And of course, then I also had models from the West, who, again, poets who may or may not have been gay at all. I mean, like John Keats was one of my early models. And then so many others. So you can have a conversation. Poetry is a conversation with the dead, I think. For me, it is that. You're writing to other poets. Poets are writing to other poets. So they don't have to be alive. They don't have to be right there. It's a community that is in your mind and heart and that you're conversing with. So that I always had, but I didn't have the writers right there whom I knew personally, which is another kind of conversation and really worth having. Yeah.
Yes, that's a very, writing is definitely a conversation with the dead for sure. Aditya, what about you? What were your influences? Would you say that there were certain writers or artists who made you the poet you are? Or do you feel like you were also trying to discover a sense of identity from a particular place?
So when I started, I was hugely influenced by the West, because I wasn't, as I mentioned, I wasn't exposed to Indian, like a lot of Indian queer literature. And then over the years, I started reading more and more queer poets like Koshang Merchant, Akhil, Aga Shahid Ali. And then and not just queer poets, poets like Tishani Doshi, and then stuff. So I think my work is also hugely influenced. Today, if I look at my work, I think it's hugely influenced by a lot of South Asian writers. But if I look at my previous work, the first book of poems, for example, it's a book of Insta poems, which is a very teenage thing. So I mean, I have outgrown that form of writing now, because my work has grown today. I mean, I'm still like proud of it, because I think at that time that was the only thing that I knew how to do, right? So yeah, I think everything's grown. I mean, I've changed so much as a person today. So yeah.
So do you feel that then you would do you feel that then influences that shaped you, were they only literary influences, or do you feel that there were also influences from other mediums, other forms of art, which ultimately kind of resulted you in becoming more the poet you decided to be?
I think most of my influences, I think they're from the literary background. Because yeah, I mean, I don't think, I mean, I became more interested and inquisitive in reading other people's work, because initially I wouldn't read. And I learned something that if I have to write and if I have to become a good poet, then I have to read a lot. So yeah, I think they're all from literary background.
What about
mostly?
Yes. What about you, Ruth? I mean, when you were starting as a poet, the world was very different, and now we have things like Insta poetry, different models of how to even consider writing these poems. How do you feel in relation to these sorts of, I don't want to say innovations, but maybe these changes or these movements? Do they also affect you, or do they just kind of exist in their own little space and they don't affect you as much?
Are you asking?
I'm asking Ruth. Ruth, yes. About like Insta poetry and the ways the technology has kind of changed the dissemination of how we view these forms, or other things like, say, like other models of storytelling that are now affecting your work.
I'm certainly influenced by things that I didn't know when I was writing when I was 20. I've learned Urdu, and I'm influenced now by Urdu poetry. I've learned Sanskrit. I'm influenced by the Mahabharata. I've just written a book on Mahabharata now. So I'm influenced by a lot more reading than just what I was reading when I was young. Am I influenced by Insta poetry and so on? No, this is the first I've ever heard of it.
Heard of Insta poetry? You don't even know about this. No. You know what Okay, so Insta poetry. Instagram,
right? I said I'm influenced. I'm writing to I'm the past, which is not the past in my lifetime, but the much longer past. I'm much more interested in literature of the past which has lasted, and that is the literature I want to spend. You have only a short time to live and to read, and you have choices. You have to make choices of what to read. And I would prefer to read the Mahabharata. So,
of course, to be fair, War and Peace. I understand. I completely understand where you're coming from.
It's a matter of what one chooses, right? So I read very few contemporary living writers. There are very few, very selective. Like Suniti Namjoshi I mentioned, who I think is absolutely wonderful. So yeah, I read.
You should also read Akhil Katyal because he's actually a good poet. I mean, I'm not just saying that because
I know Akhil. And I've read some of his. He sent me his early MPhil dissertation when he was writing that when he was a kid. So I've read some of his work and I've glanced at
I understand. Yeah, I understand. There's that need to want to speak to the eternal or to be part of that kind of dialogue with the eternal. So I understand that too.
I don't claim to be part of it at all. I don't think my poetry is going to last in that way at all. I don't claim to be part of it at all in that way. It's just what draws one. It's just what I want to read for pleasure, what draws me. It's not about it's not that I think that I can write the way Keats wrote, It's not that at all.
So being a part of the South Asian queer literary scene for much longer than either of us, one question is what sorts of changes have you seen over the course of time that are both positive and negative? And then what are the sorts of changes you wish you would see more of? Or what are the types of directions you would be interested in seeing perhaps as this, as say, South Asian LGBT literature starts to form and flourish?
Okay, I'd like to see a lot more fiction and poetry by women and about women. Most of it's still by men.
Yeah, and that's also the LGBT scene.
If you think of all the major, how much attention does Suniti Namjoshi even get compared to Vikram Seth, say? Both are great writers, but or you just look at all the spate of novels, and most of them are by or about gay men and a few transgender. Very little on women, actually, very little by women. That's one change that I'd be interested in seeing, and I think that there's a lot more writing, and that's great. There's a lot more writing, and the more that is written, the more excellence will emerge, right? So any body of writing is going to be uneven, and more excellence will emerge as more people write. So it's great to see many more people writing, and it's also great to see a lot of straight writers just having LGBT characters in their work or themes in their work. That's very important, I think. Whether it's TV or movies or or fiction, it's great to see the themes in many people's work, not just identity based. I think that's very important.
No, I agree with you. Aditya, do you have any sorts of thoughts on that same question?
Yeah, I think I compiled a list recently of the books that of South Asian LGBT books, and I think I totally agree with what Ruth is saying, but that a lot of and similarly with the movement, I think it's very cis gay male dominated, and I think even with literature, and these are the things that we don't generally think about. Because I as a gay person would be like, oh, I am writing, but I'm not being acknowledged. This is a question that will be in my head, that, oh, but publishers are not interested in my work. But then I have to think about also the question that Ruth is saying, that there are more things that people are not paying attention to, like work by queer women, for example. I think even today, I don't know if I've come across to a lot of queer women writing. I know a couple of them personally, but they're not so much into the writing scene. They're not out there. So yeah, I think this is also something that we need to think about.
I'm sure both of you know this, but I'll just leave it also for the sake of this conversation. There's this novel called Inga, which was written by someone Gupta. I don't remember her. I'll just look it up very quickly. I think I want to say Poile Gupta, but I'm probably not. Right. Oh, that is the name. Yes. So this I don't know if Poile herself is what she identifies with, but it is a novel about same-sex sexuality from a female perspective. So I'll just leave a link here. Some of you might have heard of it, some of you have not, but I just thought I'd leave it as a possible example of a book that was written a few years ago that had a female perspective written by a female person that is same-sex. All right. So I think it's interesting to talk about identity politics too. I think it's something that we all have to think about, given not only given our sexuality, but also our race and our cultural perspectives too. And so I think it would be interesting to ask questions related to that. I mean, to what degree do you feel like your work either complicitly or actively plays with those kind of like those normative characteristics that we're born in, like being same-sex, being South Asian, etc. Do you feel like you have to identify with those things in your work, or do you feel that if you want to write a sci-fi story about Romanian vampires, you do it, you know? Well, we'll start with you, Aditya.
Well, I think my identity, I think it does play an important part in the work that I do, in my writing especially, because I think even today, it's 2021, and I don't think that we know a lot of young queer writers in India, and yeah, I mean, but I think it is also, I mean, when we as queer writers come out and call ourselves queer writers, I think that statement sometimes becomes like a double-edged sword for us, because then we have to endure the both glory and the pain of being who we are, even in the writing world. So yeah, but I think for me personally, and I mean, initially I wouldn't even mind people calling me a queer writer or just a writer, but I think very recently, I mean, because of my writing, I think it's going in the direction where I don't mind people calling me a queer writer, because I write about my queerness. So yeah.
What about you, Ruth? I write about a very wide range of things, and say in poetry. It's not all about. One of the amusing things in my first book was Play of Life. There were a lot of love poems, and they were I-you poems. I and you, right?
Were you influenced by the Bhakti tradition as well? Were you influenced a little bit by Bhakti tradition?
I'm sure I was, but I and you is a typical kind of love poem all over the world, right? So, what was funny was that there was a reviewer, it got a lot of good reviews, but there was a reviewer who said, well, she's a feminist, because I was one of the founders of Manushi's feminist magazine, but to find this kind of very, she's writing, addressing the male lover with such sort of devotion, and so she assumed that the lover whom I'm addressing is male. She just assumed that. With no evidence from the text. It was I and you, so how do you know? But she assumed that. And I think that's what we do. We all assume that about poetry of the past too, about anybody's poetry. And the I and you, we just assume it's a man to a woman to a man, which is not at all necessarily the case, even with the poetry of the past. So that was interesting. And as far as identity is concerned, we all have, as we know, so many aspects to our identity, right? You can't, there are hundreds of them and you can't pin them down. And they keep changing all the time as well. So, there's being Indian, there's being North Indian, there's being South Indian, I'm part North Indian, part South Indian, there's being whatever your religious identity may or may not be. There's so many aspects to it, right? So all of that is in play. And also, say you're writing about a tree or a bird or whatever. I wrote a story about a peacock from a peacock's point of view. So it's, you imagine yourself, the work of literature is to imagine yourself into an identity that's not yours, right? So I'm not writing, and nobody I think is writing only about themselves. You're writing about the life in which you're immersed. Right?
And there's also another aspect that I don't think that you've touched on yet, which is moving to the US and also becoming part of that narrative and that sort of political, geopolitical type of narrative as well. Do you feel that moving to the US shaped or reformulated your own ideas of sexuality or race, or changed the way that you would have written about those things had you stayed in India? Or how has that culture kind of influenced your own writing trajectory as well as the other stuff?
Well, I was educated in English in India, right? I was educated primarily in English. English is my mother tongue. As I said, I had one parent from South India and one from North India, and English was their common language. So it has nothing really to do with the US. It has to do with English. And So I was familiar with American writers and with British writers and European writers much before I moved to the US. And that cultural influence remains. I don't think it has anything to do with where I'm physically located. As far as my poetry is concerned, I don't think it works in or my fiction. It doesn't work for American readers by and large, unless there's just too much. I don't explain things in which some ways in which some writers do, and I don't, and therefore it's bewildering. Much of it is bewildering, and so it doesn't. And even my scholarly work, the real average, it took me some time to realize that my readers are in India. And I used to earlier get my work published, like I'd have a US edition and an Indian edition of my scholarly work. And now I've given up on that, and I just publish in India because that's where most of the readers are. And that is the readership that in England, there may be more understanding because England and India have a longer relationship. America really doesn't. And there's less, I think, crossover understanding in America. So I'm physically, like, really in my heart and my mind, I'm in India. At least half of my heart and mind is in India, even though I'm physically located in the US. My academic work on British literature is, and I do that too, I write on British literature, so that has a readership in America as well, a scholarly readership. But creative writing, I think, no, my primary, and all my scholarly writing on India, the primary readership is in India. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to get back to that because that is its own, I think, interesting topic about demographics and market. But I want to ask Aditya as well, because you also went to New York. You were probably fairly young. You had to be young when you went there. Like, how did that affect your writing or your ideas of what writing could be, as well as in relation to your identity and race, your sexual identity as well?
I mean, when I moved to New York in 2016, I was just very young, and I wasn't writing at that time, but I was out and I was active in the queer scene in my hometown. So it really helped me. So moving to New York, I think it helped me navigate my identity. And because I wasn't writing at that point, so I don't know if it helped my writing or if it has helped my writing even today. But yeah, it did help me find a much larger community because I was somebody, I had never gone to Bombay. I had never traveled to Delhi. I traveled to Delhi like a couple of times only before moving to New York. So from Jabalpur, I directly moved to America, which was a total new place for me. And as a brown queer person, I mean, I had my fair share of experiences where yeah, some of the things that I experienced were concerning, but then yeah, I think it just helped me with my identity and helped me find myself more as a person. And yeah, I don't think it helped my writing as much as, yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, so when you say community, do you mean people who are also South Asian or people of color or writers, or what do you define as the community that New York gave you? Or mix?
It was just it was just a mix of everything in America, yeah. And you know, so because obviously in Jabalpur I hadn't seen a trans man, or and you know, so it was very new for me. So it was like I was exposed to a lot of different people, different identities. Then I got more inquisitive, and I learned more about it. And then I wanted to tell about it to more and more people, that okay, this is this, that is that, this is how you address someone, this is how you don't address someone. So yeah, it was more like a learning experience for me overall.
So I want to go back to what Ruth was incidentally talking about, which is market. Do you feel that if you were to have to write something for the US market or the UK market, would you have to also make certain changes to what you would have to write? Or do you feel like you would want to pursue a relationship with those markets, knowing that you might have to write up to a certain way of thinking? Or would you stay in the, maybe have you not even thought about it much yet because you might be...
In prose nonfiction, yes, I made a few changes. Like I wrote that book, Love's Right on Same-Sex Marriage, and I explained certain things for the Indian audience about marriage in the West. I explained certain things for the Western audience about marriage in India, and then the US edition had a little more explanation than the Indian edition had of certain words and concepts and things like that, Indian concepts. So to that extent, yes, but with poetry and fiction, you can't do that. With poetry and fiction, you can't be providing footnotes and glossaries and explanations all the time, right? It just doesn't work, and that's so it's difficult for an American reader to understand. what is going on. Not all the poems. At some points it's possible, but in some poems it's difficult. It depends. So yeah.
Well, and how about you?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what Ruth is saying, because there have been instances where I felt the same thing, and people have told me that I need to be more articulate in explaining certain words or certain sentences to my readers. But then, like how, for example, I recently wrote this poem, which is which is called "What She Left Behind the Day That She Died." So that she, as a poet, I want to keep that she as a mysterious she. I don't want to reveal to my reader. So sometimes, and I think sometimes, it confuses the reader, because, and this is something that someone told me, that you should reveal who you're talking about in the poem. But then I think I cannot do that always, right? To everything. For example, I'm maybe writing about something in India. I don't want to like reveal it to people. So I want to have some sort of mystery sometimes, but I think I think outside readers, I think it's very difficult sometimes to explain to them everything.
And that's also an interesting talk of itself, because what you're actually referring to is also like that kind of inclarity or battles of clarity between reader and author, which is its own, I think, interesting difficulty. Yeah, and that's not cultural. That's also just subjective. That just depends on the way one individual would read your poem. Well, normally we would have like a little bit of time for audience questions, but I'm feeling like right now I'm really interested. This is we have two people who are representative of a certain community, but who are from very different time periods as well. Not like horribly, because we all live together in the same time. We all coexist. But I do think this is a great opportunity as well to have someone like Ruth, who's done so much for our community, and then someone like Aditya, who is just starting out, to maybe have a conversation with each other. Like, Aditya, do you have any questions you want to ask Ruth? Or maybe Ruth, do you have anything that you would like to ask Aditya, or like give some advice? Or what are you all thinking?
I do need a lot of advice. I don't need some advice. I need a lot of advice. Ruth is someone I look up to.
Oh.
And and I remember I reached out to her also some time ago with my book. And yeah, I hope I get my book published by next year. And I really want Ruth to write a blurb for the book. It would just mean a lot for me. Yeah, it would just be phenomenal. So yeah, I need a lot of advice, not just one advice.
Yes,
Time difference is that great, frankly. Like I would say that when I was teaching in India, and even now when I sometimes lecture, there is a rapport with the Indian students because we grew up in, even though it may seem like a very different time too, I think there's much more commonality there than with my American students or Americans even of my own generation. There is a total gap. For example, somebody was mentioning divisions in Pakistan. To give you an example, divisions in Pakistan. An American woman of my own age said, oh, what is the division in Pakistan? Is it between Hindus and Muslims? She doesn't know that there practically are no Hindus in Pakistan. So just that basic information, which every Indian knows, but which she doesn't know. So I think cultural difference, for me, cultural difference is much more important than time difference. I don't think time, if it was like 500 years ago, yes, that's a big time difference, but this much time difference, I don't think makes that much, is that important to me.
Yes. I wasn't trying to say again, you're like from a different time, but just from the sense of like,
Example of Hindi films and Hindi film songs, which is something I came to late in life and which is a big influence for me. Say like Shubh Mangal Zyada Savdhan, which I thought was a wonderful film, and which is it is a film of today's generation, but it refers so much to older films. It consciously refers to films like Sholay and Dosti and earlier films, right? It refers to all of them. Aadi Hu Aadi Se Pyar Karta Hu, for example, it refers to that fairly early film, 90s film. So there's a dialogue there between generations, which is very easy and flows very easily. It's not a difficult dialogue, right? In movies, and I think that's kind of revelatory.
So, but for someone like Aditya, who's just starting out and is just trying to figure out his career, would you feel like you have any advice to give him? Or anyone in that position, maybe?
No, how can you give advice to anyone about poetry? You can't give advice to anyone. They want to write what they
Believe in, yeah.
one could give practical advice like where to find a publisher or something.
Yeah.
I've asked,
Mhm.
I found Copper Coin by asking Aditya, for example. Because very few publishers are now publishing poetry, whether in America or India, anywhere. Most of them have stopped publishing poetry. Penguin used to and now doesn't. So I asked Aditya and he suggested Copper Coin. So that's the kind of advice one can give.
Yeah.
You can't give advice to people on what to write.
Yes. I can really relate to what you're actually saying because when I was a little younger, when I was a little close to Aditya's age, I also had a very similar sort of advice given to me by also a very prominent author, and she said the same thing. Like if this is meant to be your destiny, basically, you have to just go out and do this, and it's just something that you have to do. And it'll come to you. All of it will just come to you. I mean, practically, yes, some of these things might not come to us. We can't control that. But the actual writing, what we are divine to say, will just come to us. So that path will be long and arduous, but it's the path, and we just have to walk it.
Yeah, and I think with time, I've started understanding that what is meant to be will happen, no matter how much I try or how much I try to push these things. And like 2 weeks ago, three publishers have shown interest in my second manuscript, this poetry book. And a year ago, I was struggling to find a publisher for the book. So yeah, I think anything could happen, and I think we just need to like keep doing what we're doing, and not think about the rewards. So yeah, I think slowly and steadily, I think things are happening, and I think the queer movement itself, it's taking its shape, and it's heading towards another direction. And I mean, there are a lot of things even within the movement which are problematic, but I think in the upcoming decade, I think uh, things are going to be much better, because obviously things are not the same even as we speak now. So yeah.
And we also have to remember our space in all of it, that we as humans are quite small in the long run. We live a fairly short amount of time. Even if we write something, the chance of it doing anything beyond what we believe in it to do is very minimal. And then even if it does that, even the greats like Shakespeare, Homer will eventually be lost to time, because we ourselves will be, as a species, will be lost to time. So we have to just accept that. And if we do something, we do it because we believe in it. We believe it must be done, and then we just have to walk
Yeah.
that path. But as you said, we cannot focus on rewards because life is not inherently rewarding in the first place. It's just meant to exist, and we exist inside of it. So anyways, on that somewhat futile note, do you have anything else you'd like to share? You feel like you would like to add to the conversation before we start wrapping up?
For me,
Anyone, yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, see, writing from a non-metropolitan space for me has been very daunting, because initially I wouldn't, and I don't have a community of let's say writers here who I can connect to, who I can talk to, who I can maybe talk about publishing or maybe just writing in general. So a lot of it, I mean, most of it obviously I did on my own, and I've just learned, or with time, everything I've learned from people. I've learned from, I've picked up things from everybody. I've picked up, as they say, I picked up yarn from people. Everybody I meet, I ask them for one advice, one gyan ka advice I ask them, so that I just keep it with me. So yeah, it's been daunting, but I also think that it's been very liberating also. And I think for the kind of support that I've received uh, from my peers who've come before me and who've written before me, and I obviously their struggles would have been much different than my struggles. It would have been much difficult. At least now, I have some representation. I have things online. I can go online and I can find a community there, if not physical. So yeah, I mean, it's not so bad. And yeah, I think I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing with the support and love from my peers like Ruth and everybody else. And I'm so grateful for what they have done, so that we can do what we're doing now. So yeah.
What about Hindi writers? Since you're from Jabalpur, are you in conversation with Hindi writers?
No, actually, I don't write in Hindi, so I
No,
am sure there might be.
I know you don't write in Hindi, but still? Are you talking to them since you mentioned
No,
Hindi?
I know a writer who writes in Hindi, and she writes phenomenal. She's a queer woman, and she writes phenomenal Hindi poetry. So I've also encouraged her to write more, and she's also writing more. And we discuss, we like recite our poems to each other. And she's someone so I didn't know that she lived in my city, and I found her online. She runs a page. So I found her online, and then we connected, and now we like recite poetry to each other at night, and we did it this entire lockdown. We did it. So yeah, I'm optimistic that even in the upcoming years, because she's working on a lot of fiction and books. I think even she'll become huge. I think in the upcoming years. I'm very proud and happy.
Have you tried to translate your work in Hindi?
What?
Have you tried translating your work into Hindi?
Well, I would love to translate my work in Hindi, but my Hindi is not so good. I mean, I can speak Hindi, but my written Hindi is not so good. So I really need to like learn how to like. I've started writing in Hindi recently, but I don't know if I can translate. I don't think I'm so trained to
You should
translate
try.
my work at this
Try.
point.
I think you could try because I just translated this novel into Hindi and it's come out from Rajmal Prakashan under the title Pariyon Ke Beech. And I've never done
Mm-hmm.
it before. I've always translated from Hindi and Urdu into English, but not from English into Hindi. So I wasn't sure I could do
Mm-hmm.
it, but I did do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a real learning exercise. And it's coming on the title Pariyon Ke Beech. It's just come out from Rajmal. So that's something you could try to do. I think a lot literature, Hindi is of course a flourishing literary world, but on LGBT themes there isn't much in Hindi, and so it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I will think of translating my book in Hindi. I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
We need more also LGBT writing in the different regional languages too, so it would certainly be valuable.
I also think that, so I think since I've been struggling with my work to be published in the past, something that I have come across is that there are writers who are trying to like write LGBT writers, like let's say someone's writing in Marathi, someone's writing in Hindi, or someone's writing in English. But I think the problem is that now I think, and I don't know, I'm not saying this, I'm not claiming this, but I think publishing has become more into a business. So publishers don't want to invest their money into, let's say, somebody who writes queer poetry in Hindi, or maybe like queer poetry in general. And poetry is a very niche market. Poetry doesn't even have a lot of like a big market, like a selling market. So I think it has also come down to who is going to and what is going to sell and what is not going to sell today. And I think that needs to change. And I think.
Of course, it has to be that. Obviously, the publishers to keep alive have to be able to sell it. But I won't think much of books of poetry as books of poetry are hard to sell. But magazines like Hans, like Katha Desh, etc., Hindi magazines and other language magazines are very open. I think now they are actually looking for materials on these issues. They want to. So I think sending a poem here or there, that can really work.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. You should try to maybe work out and just getting your writing into journals.
Yeah, I've decided that I will be like start sending my work in this month. I made a list of like journals.
Sometimes if you build that portfolio, sometimes, I mean, it's very rare, especially now, but sometimes the publisher will come to you or someone will come to you and they'll notice your work and then want to support it. I think as writers, we get into the habit of always trying to push the door open, but sometimes we have to let the door be and then let the person come out of the door, whoever it happens to be. So,
yeah.
Anything else? Well, it was so wonderful to have both of you in conversation. I feel like there was a lot discussed here that is certainly something we can all learn from. And I'm looking forward to reading more of your works and following your careers and hearing about everything as it unfurls.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
No,
it was lovely talking to the both of you.
Well, so wonderful. Well, then we will have, we're still figuring out, I think, we're starting to wrap up with Golchakkar. We will have an event about like South Asian writing from Australia coming up in 2 months, but we're still figuring out what our planning is for the upcoming September. But we're super happy to have you both here, and I look forward to hearing more.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.
Wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.